Okay, I think that's the end of our introductory Jasmophone. Hope everyone enjoyed the waiting music. It sounded like it was getting pretty intense then towards the end. A very big welcome to everybody joining us live for another installment of our monthly Geek Talks. Now, many of you may have noticed that this is quite different from any Geek Talk that we've ever done in the history of ICEHOUSE, actually. So normally the agenda is usually implied within the name. Geek Talk, we talk about geeky things happening in the world of technology that affects ICEHOUSE and our customers and our community of tech-minded people. But this month, we wanted to try something quite different, something that is extremely close to many of us, whether we are man, woman, or other. And that is acknowledgement and recognition of International Women's Day, which was earlier this month. And so to celebrate this, and as we actually approach Kartini Day later next month, we thought it was a really timely discussion to have and to really hear from experts who we consider have done incredible things within their own industries, both men and women, to talk about a topic that is very dear to us, and that is to discuss how have traditional gender roles changed during the pandemic. As many of you know, this has not been an ordinary last 12 months, but especially for women who were already facing some unique challenges across both professional and social lives, but that has been somewhat impacted, some would say even more during the pandemic. So we're here today to learn about those experiences and really take away something that we can all do to really address this as husbands, partners, sons, employers, colleagues. We all wear many, many different hats. And so we'd really like the opportunity as much as possible to get some engagement from those on the call. So just as a reminder, we have actually a Slido. And the Slido is available for people who maybe don't want to raise a hand during the call to post their questions. Now, I've been told the Slido address is, if you type into your browser, is S for Sam, L for Lima, I for India, dot, D for Delta, O for October. So that's slide.do. When you type that into your Internet Explorer, or Google Chrome, I don't think anyone uses Internet Explorer anymore. And then you type the hashtag IH Geek Talk. So that's ICEHOUSE, but just the I and H, GEEKTALK. And we'll be collecting questions from the audience that we'll ask in the second half of today's Geek Talk. But before we get into that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists, who you should be able to see on the screen now. So today I am joined with Faye Simanjuntak, founder of Rumah, and I'll just give a quick brief introduction as well. In 2013, Faye founded Rumah, which is a non-profit organization with a mission to eradicate child sex abuse, trafficking, and the exploitation of women through 3 programs focused on prevention, rescue, and rehabilitation. Faye was honored in the Forbes Indonesia 30 under 30 list just last year, and also won an International Children's Peace Prize finalist in 2017. More importantly, in 2016, Faye led Rumah to open its very first safe house, which works directly with vulnerable children in the community. As of November 2020, they've assisted in the recovery of over 105 girls. In the little spare time she has, Faye's also a research contributor for UNESCO and navigates Indonesian legislation through the What is Up Indonesia program. So very big welcome to Faye. There's a lot of other applause. We have everybody else on mute. And for my next guest, I would love to introduce is Aurora Holm. She is the Managing Director and co-founder of Kyora Law Firm. With a career spanning more than 11 years, Aurora is first of all a proud working mother and also the co-founder managing director of the award-winning legal firm Kyora. Her practice covers a broad range of corporate services, from mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, financing, capital markets, and foreign investment. In 2020, Aurora was also recognized in Indonesia's top 100 lawyers, an honor she has now actually been awarded twice, which is pretty incredible. And in her spare time, Aurora is also a bit of a serial entrepreneur, and there's a pun in that because the serial entrepreneur endeavor that she's done is being the co-founder of Granola Creations, which is a very tasty muesli snack you can find at your local shopping mall. And she also actually started an NGO called Rumah Edukasi Florora, which provides scholarships to underprivileged students. So big welcome again to Aurora. For my next guest, I would like to introduce Tony Almuna, who is the program lead for the Women's Economic Empowerment at the UN Women Indonesia. Tony joined UN Women in 2006 and has spearheaded women empowerment several programs, including Women, Peace and Security, Gender and HIV, and the Prevention of Violence Against Women through the Safer Cities Initiative. Tony also graduated with a Master's in Gender and Development Studies at the University of Melbourne, Australia. As a fellow Melburnian, I can say that is the best university in the States. So a big warm welcome as well to Tony. And finally, last but certainly not least, we also have one of our very own, Abbie, who began the first 4 years of her career in human resources and recruitment consulting for a number of different executive search firms, handling clients from industries, including banking, FMCG, engineering, technology, and energy before she moved to in-house recruitment and successfully expanded her role to HR management. She has continued her work in HR for ICEHOUSE Indonesia, as well as career.com, before joining the cool kids at ICEHOUSE as the HR manager here since 2018. Now, when Abbie is not managing us cool kids at ICEHOUSE, she is playing super mom to her very own two beautiful kids, Armin and Alexa. So a big warm welcome to Abbie. I heard some cheering in the background. Okay, got a bit of a cheer squad. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the questions. So the first question may not come as a surprise at all, which is really the name of this entire panel, which is to ask to the panelists, in your opinion, how have traditional gender roles changed since before the pandemic to where we are now, a year later? I'll start by asking Tony to begin.
Thanks, Nathan, for that, for the opportunity. Of course, good afternoon, everyone. Just to respond to your questions quickly, this is a really intriguing question, of course, as the gender traditional roles shift kind of changed from the before the pandemic and now during the pandemic. I think when we talk about the traditional gender roles, we should bear in mind that it is heavily influenced by the root causes, of course, the patriarchal culture. But what has the data or our observation demonstrate during the pandemic? We don't see any changes, first of all. But what happened is actually really re-emphasizing of these traditional roles, particularly to women. Let's say, for example, during the pandemic, where the mode of work has been changing, of course, like we all probably know, where most of the work are done remotely from homes. And the consequences of that, I'm sure this is also very familiar information to us all, where the traditional roles of the unpaid cat work, of the caring work at home is traditionally mostly is, how do we say, put under women's burden. And what happened when now women have to work from home? So that burden is sort of double. First, they have to deal with their professional or career work, where they have to still do day-to-day work at official work. I mean, but at the same time, because of these traditional roles of caring is always associated with them, they have to also still take care of that. So there is some kind of a double burdens that the women has to bear when they're working from home. So, like I said, it is emphasizing the traditional roles. In fact, is sort of strengthened, if you like, or emphasized by this pandemic situation. But of course, I mean, we see there are also some report that says that we men, also starting to see that they also have a sort of responsibility as well, because they see that their spouses or their partners has to bear this burden, so they also sort of contribute to some extent with the parenting responsibilities or the caring responsibility. But then does that mean that the gender traditional role change? I would argue it is not, because we have to really to also, when we talk about the shifting or the gender related norms, we should really see beyond that. When we see there are trends that men start to probably also doing or contributing to the domestic work, for example, is that really is that also associated with the changes in the power relations? Because when you talk about gender equality, it's heavily also look into power relations. Who is still the main decision makers in the house? Is that also changed during the pandemic, even though, for example, women has been adapting some of this domestic work or not? Or secondly, probably we should also see it from at UN Women. We are used to analyze this changing or these patterns or this phenomenon by looking at women agency, meaning that whatever changes in the power relation between men and women, we associate it with the women's agency, meaning that is it happen because of the women's practical awareness or on their rights? Is it happen because they have like a negotiation skills with their spouse, saying that, you know, this is our family, and we are both parents, we have responsibility to do the parenting, not only my task as a woman, but it should be said. Is that happening or not? I think that kind of question we should really ask before we are able to really say that there is changes in the gender traditional roles, particularly in the domestic sphere when we talk about the pandemic context. So just to sum it up, based on our observation, the roles are not changing as yet. We haven't seen that. It is re-emphasized. And just to also end my statement, just yesterday, the Global Economic Forum released a survey saying that even the gender equality gaps is widening in the pandemic situations. So before the pandemic, we were a bit optimistic that gender equality will be achieved in more or less 1 century from now, 99 years. So meaning that in 99 years, we will achieve gender equality. But now, surprise, surprise, after the pandemic, even we will be only, maybe our third generation will see that the changes. It is changed from 99 years to 135 years to achieve gender equality. So imagine there are a very wide gaps now. It's happening, and that's happened in many sectors, particularly in the economic participations. And I think if we want to relate this gender equality issues with the GeekTalk and technology, one of the findings in that gap is actually to see how, because of the pandemic, there are these changes or accelerations of the use of digital technology, and that's included in employment. And we know that technology related work is men dominated, and women are not traditionally prepared to actually work in that sector. So imagine that economic participations of women, they have to really catch up with this fast moving technology area. It's worsening the gaps. So yeah, I'll end there, Nathan. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much for that detail. And although it's a little disheartening to hear that it's going to take us over a century to achieve gender equality, I guess I may be somewhat naive as an optimist to hope that maybe more of these discussions and more proactive solutions can hopefully reduce that so it happens in our lifetime. But thank you for the input. obviously love to hear from those, more affected it than, myself and Tony. Let me now offer the same question, starting with Faye, from your perspective.
So I think I obviously agree with a lot of what Tony said. He covered a lot that I wish I could have covered. But I think for me, a big thing to mention is that just because I'm a woman or, we're talking to women about the situation, just because you're a woman doesn't mean you'll face the same struggles as other women. And what I'm saying by this is that by and large, socioeconomic disparity defines what kind of struggle that you're going to have, especially in a country like Indonesia, where the wealth gap is not even just the wealth gap, where the social gap is so wide, right? Where we're ruled by essentially political business elites. It's not just, oh, there's this division between men and women, but it's also that different women will face different type of hardships and different types of responsibilities when a pandemic comes, because then you have to look at their economic background as well. So in this sense, what we've seen is that women of higher economic positions usually are able to take this opportunity kind of in this pandemic to do more, right? Providing they're not, as Katoni mentioned earlier, told to take care of traditional household chores, which are covered by Indonesian maids. They actually take the advantage to make new projects, whether that's a social project or an entrepreneurship, and they've done incredible things, but the gender roles don't shift because in their economic environment, it's normal for them to be able to do these kinds of things, right? And I say them, but I mean us, I come from a very privileged background as well. And that's meant that during this pandemic, I've had, unfortunately, the opportunity, right, to do more with my time because I'm able to stretch myself with, the switch from physical work to online work. But on the other hand, we see that women and girls in vulnerable socioeconomic positions are less able to find work, right? People who were formerly vulnerable to being trafficked are way more vulnerable now, especially because they're females. And we get so many cases, I think when we talk about trafficking, the idea is that these kids are stolen from these homes, right, at the dead of night, because that's what the movies say. But the truth is, most of the time, the perpetrators are the people closest to them. And that means that a lot of the cases that we handle are parents who sell off their daughters so that their sons can go to school. Right. And we see a really, really interesting dynamic that it's not just that people are evil, it's that people know education is important. It's that they know that they need to provide for one child, but which child are they going to provide for? Usually it's not going to be the daughter, right? It's going to be the son. And so generally, right, when I say that the perpetrators are the people to them, that uncles, that means grandparents, and those people are people that stay with the victims. So the pandemic means increased quarantine, right? It means that a lot of people have trouble finding jobs, finding, wages, finding a decent salary. And that means increased level of frustration and anger within the home, making children much more vulnerable to abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse, or even being sold off by their own parents. And so we see, right, the power relations Katoni mentioned earlier are being emphasized rather than shifted, in which men are perhaps the only ones working in this environment. And so say a mother knows that the father is a perpetrator of abuse towards their own child, the mother won't do anything because they're afraid that their way of living, or their salary will be taken away and they can't support themselves or their. And so here, it's this terrible kind of emphasis on the way that the gender disparity has impacted the most vulnerable populations. And I know I can't speak for other issues, but Rumah Faye, before the pandemic, we handled an average of 22 children a year from 2016 to 2019. So around 19 to 25 kids, depending on the year. But in 2020, we handled up to 42 children who came into our safe house. One as young as 4 years old. And so here you see that they're all girls, right? Most of them prioritized, most of them, thrown away by their families or put aside by their families because for the sole reason that they're girls and they can't contribute to the family, or that's the perception. And so I think a lot of what I'm saying is just kind of emphasizing what Katoni was mentioning earlier about how really the pandemic, the only thing it's done for the most vulnerable communities is emphasize these gender inequalities, these gender disparities, rather than shift the focus. So yeah, that I can can speak on.
Wow, that's that was a really, really in-depth answer again. And again, I guess given your background and some of the issues that you face every day, comes as certainly a surprise to myself and others who might, like you said, have that privilege where we're not confronted by these challenges, at least in our immediate circles around our immediate communities. We're lucky that we never have to experience it ourselves, only through stories like your own. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'll pass the question now to Aurora as well. A slight change of tack. I believe Abbie and Aurora both also super moms as well. So I'd be interested to hear their take on how some of those dynamics have changed as well. Over to you, Aurora.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. I think, I just want to reaffirm. I agree what Faye and Pak Tony explained before, right? And then I just want to add on the statements, right? Because excuse me. So Indonesia, based on the global gender gaps, Indonesia ranking is still in number 85. So it's not even, we don't even make it to the top 50% of the entire the world, right? And but the note from this is that Indonesia made a really big improvement in terms of economic participation and opportunity on the previous years, right? But when this epidemic happens, and most of in the lower class, most of women in Indonesia, they involve in factories, and all, as you know, all of the factories worker, they work on a daily basis, right? So women are in a position that vulnerable, that maybe women are at risk that being terminated by the employer more than men, right? Because when you are in the position of daily worker, and then the employer thinks that you will take maternity leave, or you will have to take care of your children, then and I'm not saying I'm supported, but it's only natural for the employer to see what is strategic decision for them, who to retain during pandemic, right? So despite that, the World Economic Forum highlight that Indonesia make achievement in this participation and opportunity, but at the same time during pandemic, that one of our good achievement, as we make a big progress, I'm quite sure in 2020 we will make a really setback, because Indonesia is one of the big manufacturer country, and this will affect Indonesian position in global index. And in addition that, what I have been discussed with my clients are when they discuss about termination of employment, right? There is a stigma. It's always coming the discussion of who will take leaves, and then the stigma of women taking maternity leaves, and this is not regulated in our prevailing law, that as you know, in Indonesia, if you're a woman, which is good that you have 3 months maternity leave. I know in some countries, as in the US, you don't have that as a woman, but unfortunately for men, they only have 2 days leave. So when the partner or wife are giving birth, that put women into the group that are not desirable to hire, right? When they enter a job, because they know, the employer knows that if you compare men and women, they know that the other candidate will likely to take 3 months unpaid leave. So that's what I want to highlight, that what government and us can do as an employer, right? To remove the stigma of first house child care, it's a responsible of a woman, and then from that discussion we can switch to the policy, and also we have to expect that the government involved in that, you know, in other country with better index, that it's they call it parental leave, and it's mandatory for a mother and then the father to take paternity leave. So then the women will not, then the effect will be that they are more equal position in the hiring process. Then they are equal on the compensation, right? And then when each of them back to the workforce, they are in the same position that come from a part of the parenting life, that is part of the life basically, right? So that's my concern about how this as Irianto said, that the stick we coming from when woman is taking care of the child, and then the man is making the one that making money, right, or work. And this we need to switch that to be able to position ourselves in a better global gap index.
Wow, thank you very much for that. And what I love about that is we're getting really kind of interesting perspective from three very different but very relevant views. And it just seems that there is disparities when you look at so many aspects, you know, of this entire ecosystem, where we kind of spoke about that it's not that the gender roles are changing, but the differences and the gaps are actually being emphasized. And so that's something that I've heard now, I guess, 3 times over. So we'll definitely want to address that later, but I want to give Abbie a chance to answer the original question as well.
Okay, I think yeah, the other panels have covered you know, more on the macro perspective. I think I would, you know, in my expertise, I think I would be more suitable to give a perspective, like, you know, from, you know, my own background, which is, you know, I'm coming from a basically non-traditional household. So I think, in my opinion, before and, you know, right now, before the pandemic and right now, I think before the pandemic, the division of tasks within, like, you know, household is probably pretty clear. Like, you know, I think, like Faye said, you know, for people who are more privileged, you know, you have, you know, other primary caregiver that can help with the household stuff and take care of the kids. And then now with the pandemic, and, you know, the working women are also at home, I think, you know, there are not necessarily more responsibility, but there are more a higher expectation for women to be more hands-on, since, you know, the initial boundaries, which is like, you know, the geographically, oh, you're at work, you're not at home, is no longer there. Now the women are at home, you know, there's expectation, okay, so you're at home, you need to be more hands-on with, you know, with the kids, with the household stuff, and also, you know, expectation from the school, and then expectation from your spouse as well. So I think that's the main difference. And, you know, considering, I think at least most working women I know, working moms that I know, you know, they carry a sense of, you know, sense of guilt when they're at work. They're constantly thinking about, like, oh, how about my kids? How are they doing? Am I spending enough time with them? And then when they're at home, they still think about, like, oh, I still have, you know, so many to-do lists I haven't done, and they're still even like taking work calls during like holidays and stuff. I know, like, you know, a few friends even at the hospital, they still take like work calls. So I think like carrying that guilt around, you know, makes women, like, you know, in this situation, they would try to do it all, like, you know, take on, like, okay, the demand or the expectations from the household, and then also expectation, like work responsibility. I think women will try to do it all. I think that would be the main, you know, difference that's gonna be experienced by the working women in a non-traditional like household. Yeah, I think that's my take on that.
So those kind of internal pressures.
Yes, internal pressure. Yes, and yeah.
Okay. And I also want to just touch on something that was kind of talked about in a few of the answers. So you know, Faye, you mentioned that, you know, given, you know, a lot of situations that families from, say, lower socioeconomic backgrounds are faced with a horrible decision, like, do I send my son or my daughter to school? And like you said, more often than not, the sons are getting, you know, favored over girls. And I think even Aurora, you said as well, when employers are given the option, you know, do I make my female staff redundant or my male staff redundant? Again, women are losing out when it comes to those 50-50 decisions. Are there other examples that you can think of where, you know, women are facing similar disadvantages when confronted with, you know, a decision like an employer is making? Do I retain someone? Do I send someone to school? Are there others that, you know, maybe we as men aren't aware of? That's to either of you as well.
Okay, I'll take it.
Sure.
Yeah. So your question is related to pandemic or in general?
Just in general, and if it's been, I guess if it's been accelerated by the pandemic, that would also be interested. But we're certainly not limiting ourselves to only those issues that existed in the last 12 months. No.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's interesting. For instance, more and more companies, not only multinational companies, try to be compliant and try to have a diversity and inclusion, more diversity and inclusion. However, they have this good faith, but they don't know how to implement it. They implement one thing, but it's not perfect, and it makes things are even worse. For instance, they intend to increase women participation in certain level, right? So they hire more, but during this is something new. So more and more companies who are a little bit advanced in the knowledge of gender equality, they try not to ask, for instance, salary history. This is to end the pay gap, right? Because if historically there is a pay gap between women and men, and if every hiring process always the employee asks about the history, then we will not make any progress, or probably we will make progress, but it slows down the mission, right? Because the closing the gap of the payment. So that's something that in several companies, when they ask me to review their I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I only review company regulation. But when we have a deeper discussion about how to be compliant, because maybe it's not like in Norway or Scandinavian country that a company will be fine if they're not if they violate gender equality. But in Indonesia, it's more like a loose and policy from the government, right? A guidance, but they want to compliance with this guidance and policy. And I think I see that asking for his salary history and asking whether you're intended to get married or not, and which surprisingly some employers still ask that kind of questions, right? And that's make women in very disadvantaged positions.
Yeah. So if I could add to that kind of briefly, definitely kind of two streams of this conversation. We're talking about structural and cultural discrimination. And on the more cultural side, I will say, I think from my own experience at Rumah, a lot of the issues is kind of this internalized misogyny as well. And so it's the idea that our role as women is to be able to serve the people around us. And so what we see around a lot of the time, and I touched upon briefly earlier, is that we'll see girls as young as 13, 14 who get drafted because they went out to find a job on their own. So they weren't told by their parents to go out and find a job, although it might have been, suggested, right, quite obviously to them. But they felt that as the daughter, they had a responsibility to try to provide for their family. So a lot of times when they were asked, why did you go out and do that? It would usually be on the basis of, oh, I had to make sure my younger sibling was able to go to school, or so that my mom could eat. And so these kind of things, these kinds of cases happen so frequently. And they're, I think, a primary example of how a lot of girls are kind of told, kind of forced to internalize this idea that they have the responsibility to care for the people around them financially, you know, not just care for them, sorry, to support them financially when they're not ready to, right? And when it really isn't their responsibility to at all. So that's kind of on the more cultural side. But if I'm being honest, and you know, before we even talk about culture, a lot of times we kind of have to take a look at the structural side as well. And Aurora mentioned this really great about it in the private sector. So I'm not completely familiar with that, but I can speak a little bit about the public sector. And I think there's a lot of different examples I could, but the one that I think is most important is the fact that the Indonesian military, for those of you who don't know, still forces female candidates to undergo virginity testing in order for them to become a part of the military, part of the police. And this virginity testing has been proven to be inaccurate. So right, we don't even have to talk about the fact that, you know, virginity, yes or no, but just the test itself is inaccurate, right? And so it's like this that affect exclusively women, right? In places, and especially women who are in vulnerable positions, right? Usually people who enter the military, it's not out of misplaced loyalty, but it's generally out of, it's a bed to sleep in, right? It's food to eat every day. I know I can say that because that was my dad's reason. So please know for me. But yeah, and so these women, they're definitely in more vulnerable positions. They have essentially maybe, if not no other choice, minimal choice. And so they're subjected to the structural, I don't even want to say discrimination, structural violence, right? That's never gone out, because if it is, they're going to be blamed for it. So I think that might shed a little bit of light maybe into both cultural and structural discrimination against women that still happens and is exacerbated during this pandemic, when women are forced into lower economic conditions than they were previously.
Wow, thank you for that. And I think that's an excellent way to distill, you know, what is quite a complex social issue in terms of the cultural and structural. I'd love to hear from you as well, Tony, your thoughts on that from, I guess, having been somebody who is probably more around the structural elements of that discrimination, but feel free to add on either.
Sure, thanks, Nathan. I think I have to, I agree with what Aurora and Faye has just said. I mean, at structural level, we can see also the discriminatory laws towards women are still there. Well, the National Commissions of Anti-Violence Against Women, for example, has mapped out, I think it's more than 50 or more than 100 discriminatory laws that are still existing both at national and local levels. I mean, if you want to remove all the barriers, all the discrimination, unless and until these policies are removed, the practice will be there. I mean, well, looking at the facts and the data that we all have been saying today, of course we are seeing, of course, we probably can be a little bit pessimistic, but I want to also ask us to also see into the more optimistic side. For example, I mean, should also celebrate the small changes or small wins that happened recently. I will pick up Aurora statement, for example. At UN Women, we have these programs on women's economic empowerment, where we ask, where we call for the private sectors to also do their part in making sure women's empowerment and gender equality are achieved. And we're really happy to actually see there is this strong interest and commitment coming from the private sectors to do so. Say, for example, one indicator for that is we have this framework or guidelines for women's empowerment at business that we call the WEBS principle or the women's empowerment principles. Recently, in the past 1 or 2 months, we see there are increased numbers of the private sectors who are signing the principle, meaning that they are willing to change the system to be more accommodative or inclusive towards women. So they are doing or reviewing their policies to enable women's empowerment in their workplace, in their own business place, along the supply chains, for example. So they start considering to buy products or making women small SMEs as a part of their supply chains, and even through their CSR wings, for example, they are doing a lot in their communities on economic empowerment, and even until to the programs of prevention of violence against women. So what I'm saying is, yes, there are a lot of challenges, but I am also saying that, but we are also witnessing that the ally, the partners are also growing, both from public sectors and also civil society, of course, no need to mention, but also from the private sectors are there. And we talk about business world, even the state-owned enterprises. We recently had this discussion with the Ministry of State-owned Enterprises, where they emphasizes the need to make the state-owned enterprises to be more inclusive, and they have the ambition to increase women leadership in the state-owned enterprises up to 30%, for example. For us, it's a huge commitment, and that's something that we want to hear. Out of our optimism or out of our pessimism, there are things that make us even more optimistic to achieve. I mean, there are a long way to go, of course, but at least this small step, like what we have today, this discussion, the space where we can talk about information and our concerns about what's happening towards women and girls, if you like. I think this is a small step to make big impact, and I'm pretty sure if this kind of spirit is maintained, this 135 years gap can be fostered or can be speed up to some extent. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and I'll pass on to Abbie as well to add to that. If there, we talked about a lot of challenges. You said that women are less likely to be retained, less likely to be sent to university, more likely to face what sounds like these growing expectations, right? Both internalized and in the family unit, to not only hold down a job but also support the family at the same time. Are there other challenges that you would like to share, either your own personal or professional opinion?
I think the other panels have covered, most of the issue that, women challenge nowadays. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move to the next question, because I've been taking a few notes as we've been going, and I'm really, really fascinated to move into a place of trying to, not only acknowledge the challenges, but start to think about, some of the potential solutions in the space. So if it's okay, I'd like to start really at the education level, because I know that we've touched on it briefly. And I think, Faye, your perspective is particularly interested, being a current student as well. So for some of us, that was a long time ago. But for you as somebody who's not only working with young girls, but also as a student, are you seeing some of those inequalities at an education level? Do you have, I guess, any observations that we could take away as we, from the perspective of employers as well, who are employing directly from the schools?
Yeah, so I think it was an interesting transition into the pandemic, just because I graduated from high school in 2019 and I opted to take a gap year. So the COVID-19 pandemic hit during the gap year, and I entered university during online teaching. So I hadn't had any type of introduction into it. They kind of just threw me into it, assuming that I'd already understood it. So it was kind of terrible. I will say it was just hours and hours of sitting in front of a screen. And I studied university abroad, so it did mean that I was kind of splitting my time. In the morning, I was working. So the joke I say to my friends is like 9 to 5 is working, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is working, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. is going to school. But it just wasn't enough time, I think, for me to be able to really understand the materials that was being presented to me. And a big part of it was this expectation. And I don't know if maybe it's just me, but something that I felt was almost harmful was this kind of girl boss idea. I was never really a fan of it, the idea that women are great at multitasking. And I know a lot of women are the ones who say that. But for me personally, it made me feel like I had a responsibility to do more, start more, take advantage of this pandemic, because as a woman, that's what I had to do. And I will not lie, I caved to that pressure and started new projects. But it was just really interesting for me to see kind of how different people reacted to the pandemic. Kind of separating from that, I think it might be a little bit clear that I did, because I come from a privileged background, I ended up graduating from an international high school, which meant that a lot more opportunities were more available for me during this pandemic, right? In terms of online schooling and academic learning. But I will, if I can kind of draw this to, so my friend and I were talking a couple weeks ago. And the pandemic has actually given time for a lot of regional schools to revamp their educational programs. And maybe Katoni can speak more into this, but she became a consultant for the sexual reproductive health curriculum, several high schools here in Bali, which is piloting in 5 high schools. And during the creation of the curriculum, so I guess the pro is that it was giving more time for schools to revamp these curriculums, but the con was that our mindsets are still the same, right? So she came in, you have to teach these children about dating, right? About, in terms of this unit about reproductive health, but we weren't allowed to use the term dating, like pacaran. We had to use the word pertemanan sehat dengan hubungan romantis. Yeah, Katoni knows what I'm talking about. Nobody else does. Whenever I complain about this, people are like, what? And in English, that translates to healthy friendships with romance and feeling. There's something like that. And so that's the kind of things that we're told to put in the curriculum. And when we said, kids are dating, they say, no, they're not. No, they're not dating. And so it's things like this that I think kind of shed a light on the situation of the national education here in Indonesia, is that in some cases it's great, but the problem is that it's not equal, right? And the whole point, I don't know if everybody here is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goal, just the goal of education, it's the goal of quality education for all. And so what we see here is, okay, sure, maybe schools have time to kind of revamp curriculums possibly, or take a step back and evaluate their programs, but has there been any change in thinking about how this education has to be given or has to be presented to students? Not necessarily. So I think that's what I had to add about healthy friendships with romance and feelings.
Well, that's that's a new term. Maybe I'll use that next time my mom asks if I'm seeing anyone yet. Healthy, I've got some healthy friendships. Wow. But I think on the broader issue of the challenges of having a high quality education, I think one of the things that was also touched on before was the opportunities that we see emerging in Indonesia as more investment is pouring in, as digital adoption is increasing. We often see that women are somewhat left kind of behind when it comes to those opportunities, particularly in technology. Tony, is this something that has been, I guess, on the UN Women's agenda, or something that you've been across yourselves?
Yeah, sure, Nathan. I would like to pick up the points that Faye has mentioned about particularly the education participation.
Yeah.
Actually, surprisingly, if I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm not mistakenly put this data, but based on the MDG report, before the SDGs, we have the MDG, the Millennium Development Goals report. The data show that the education participation of women and girls are actually higher in Indonesia compared to boys. But then there's participation in professional work when it comes into employment. The trend is declining, meaning that more men are employed compared to men. If you also look at the current data, the labor force participation by gender, for example, 80% of men in Indonesia are employed, but it's only 50% of women who has formal employment in Indonesia. So this is a trend that we are also really curious to see. And what we found out is actually why education among girls is probably there's prayer callings happening. The azan, I hope you don't hear it in my background sound. But anyway, what we see is actually one of the challenges why apart from the access that Jonathan has also mentioned, the other issues of the low participation or increased dropouts of girls in Indonesia, we also seeing a number of the child marriage as an issue, which is also still high. And I think until 2015 or so, the marriage law actually still legalize the child marriage by putting the legal age for women, for girls to marry is only 15 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, my memory is really bad. But it's really, but young girls are allowed legally to marry by the law that time until a revisions of the law is made in 2016, and it increased the formal age of marriage to 19 among girls and 21 for boys. But then the problem doesn't stop there, because not every, we have laws, that's one thing, but the other question is about how is the actualization or the practice of the laws. In Indonesia, as we know, there is still the practice of nikah siri, which people, child or girls and boys are being married, but without registering it formally into the government institution. So the practice of child marriage, even though the law stipulates that child under certain age cannot be married, but it is still going on because it is done traditionally or culturally acceptable in some contexts of Indonesia. And that's another challenge if we talk about girls' access to education. The second point is we should also see that I hate to use this term because it sounds very jargonic, but that's how we in UN usually communicate, and I really want to avoid that kind of use that terminology. But there is this trend of education is also gendered, meaning that certain sectors of education, people can already automatically associate it with certain genders. Let's say, for example, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. It is male dominated. If girls and the boys both are has the same interest into pursuing education in these sectors, for example, questions will come from the surrounding, and girls usually tends to be directed to the other sectors who are seen as more suitable or associated to their gender roles. So that's also a challenge, and particularly when we see the growth, like I said earlier, where the use of technology is a must and a demand. If this kind of trend is being maintained, I'm afraid that the challenges will be how do we say, will be bigger. So normalizing the technologies, for example, for girls, I think is something that we really need to start also promoting and communicating as well.
Excellent. You touched on quite a few things there. I don't know which one to begin with, but while we're on the topic, the latest topic about women in STEM, because I think there's been a lot of research that says higher participation of women in STEM leads to significant opportunities after school. Because I was very surprised to hear that women actually have high representation at a school level, but then that for some reason the scale just completely reverses when it comes to actual employment and really economic empowerment. So I'd like to kind of dive a little bit more into that, exactly what is happening between school and entering the workforce. Is it like Faye says, is it more around structural challenges, or particularly say cultural? We learned more about the rise of child marriages. Did you have your hand up, Faye? Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to that? Yeah, sure.
I can mention, sorry, I'm too used to being in Zoom class. So I was like, yeah, this is like just short, but I think something I am definitely not the expert in. So if anybody would like to add, please do. A big thing here is a lot of women work informally, right? And the biggest thing is as PRT, pekerja rumah tangga. So usually housemaids, as much as it, they're paid, they're not actually protected under Indonesian law. So there is a law that's being proposed to the People's Representative Council called RUU PPRT. And I'm not the legal person here, so I'm not going to talk too much about the law itself. But as far as I understand it, a lot of women come into work. They might have graduated high school, they have not, but they'll work in informal places. It's not necessarily them. There aren't necessarily abused, but they might be exploited because there aren't any laws that can regulate the hours that they work, where they work, and how much like holidays they get, how many days off they get. That was just kind of my 2 cents.
Yep. No, I think that's an excellent point. And sometimes those informal workers are definitely not represented in the statistics or in the regulation, and that kind of leaves, you know, a lot of women disenfranchised, that they don't get those same benefits that you would in a formal working place environment. And I think, you know, Aurora, you touched on, you know, even some basic entitlements such as leave. So like even when they are given some type of formal employment, we're still seeing discrimination at the most basic levels. But on the, you know, I'd like to hand over to someone with a law background to kind of add to what Faye said as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's quite interesting, right? Because when we think about how to address gender parity, we always talk, and then we still need to talk about what women should receive. But sometimes we forget how can we incentivize men. Then the stigma, it's balanced, right? Because for instance, sick kids, right, or sick parents or leaves, right? This is something that if it's only given to women, then if you're couple partner, then the women will be forced and or put in the position that she will be the one have to take the leave, right? And that's maybe the intention was the intention back in the days was good, right? But society changed, the phenomenon changed, and I think addressing that, I use this. I use a Scandinavian country as an example, right? Like normalize that father taking care of a child. It is important, right? And normalize, for instance, I would like to give a comment on Thai, right? Obviously I'm out of school long time ago, so I don't have a knowledge on current curriculum, right? But I remember when you're at school, and if you're I went to private senior high school but public junior high school, and I saw the difference, right? In a public school, if you're a girl, then you were offered extracurriculum as sewing, painting, and dancing. And then if you're a man, then there is a sport which women can take it, but there is a stigma. If you're only women, then you don't have a women team, and they will not put women girls to a men team, right? And then extracurricular such a electro, so we call it engineer, right? When they invent how to set up a traffic light, how to set up a electricity parallel or series, something like that. That there are many girls interested in this, right? And there are many boys interested in sewing or dancing, right? But the education system only offer that kind of things to certain groups, and then stigmatize that the boys will take dancing. I heard it myself that the teacher like, oh, I would not recommend you as a boy to take this dancing class, you will get bullied or something, right? And that's mindset. It's carried by these boys and girls when they become men and women and in the workforce, right? So when they become when a man wants to, you know what, I want to leave a job, I want to take care of a child, but the system is there's no system in place to allow them to do that, right? And that's when I think that as a lawyer, and when I see our manpower regulation law, that men only given 2 days and women have received 3 months, that's a big difference. And then there is another regulation. If you work for a state, men can take up to 1 month, but need to be reviewed by the supervisor. So it's so complicated for men to switch what is normal, what do they want otherwise than the system, right? And I think that's something that if it started with a regulation government that allows men to do this, and I hope then the society thinks like, oh, okay, if the system says so, then it's probably normal for me to take a leave, right, as a parent. Or so that's something that I think how I'm fully aware that whatever written in regulation not necessarily happen, but it's nice to have a guidance of as a society, right? What is a normal, quote unquote normal and not normal. And yeah, I think that's something for me. Um, it's quite important. And then the other thing is technology. I just want to little bit relate, maybe a little bit off the topic of your question, but I just want to continue what Pak Tony said, right? About, okay, let's being positive about something. If I can take something, like it's a pandemic. This pandemic, it's given everybody a hard time, especially women, right? But if I can have a hope on something, this pandemic forced many companies, even state enterprises, to go digital. This allows women to have I hope, better access to workforce and a better position. Now women are really in a difficult situation because of the pandemic. Schools are closed. Maybe if you're in a better in a privileged society, then the nanny who used to come to your place, and you suddenly they're not coming to your place, right? But I hope when things are going back to normal, schools are open, and then then the flexibility that we never imagined before, right? The remote working, then all of us realized that it is possible. And it was, let's not forget, that was the biggest problem for women in their workforce and career, right? When they have to, they only need to take, sometimes they need to take 2 hours of their working hours to drop kids to school, to drop kids to the dentist, right? And but if they don't need to take a daily, they can work remotely. And then if enterprises suddenly or enterprises realize that everything can be done remotely, and this use something that used to be disadvantage and can be the technology can allow women in a workforce participation, I hope. Yeah.
Fantastic. And just touching on what you said about the opportunities with that technology brings, it's not always, you know, such a bad tool. I think it's like anything, a hammer can be used as a weapon or as something positive. But when we think of, I guess, the opportunities in technology, Abbie, I'd like to hear kind of your perspective as well as somebody who's involved in this, you know, a lot in terms of our recruiting and trying to encourage, I guess, more women to participate in technology. What are some of those challenges that you see that are happening in the market?
Sorry, I think I lost connection somewhere. Oh. Yeah, in between. But okay. Yeah. So I think probably I can add a little bit more on the related to, you know, how women, the participation of women in education for STEM are actually high, but when it comes to work opportunity, it actually decreases. I think based on my experience, you know, I've worked with clients who are in, like, you know, engineering, energy industry. So it is true, women are not, like, especially for the more technical positions, women are not actually like preferred, you know, like a desirable candidate, you know, for hire. You know, just you know, for the, I think the main reason is, you know, the potential liability. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but yeah, the potential liability, because, like, you know, for, you know, engineering, kind of like construction and energy industry, you know, a lot of, like, you know, the projects or the work they have to deal with, it's in like either in like a remote area that's like offshore, those kind of things. So having women in, like, you know, that kind of working environment are seen as a potential liability. Probably. And I think the issue is, I think back to the, I guess, society perception of, like, oh, women are I don't know, deemed more weak than men in this case, or maybe the society thinks that women are not able to defend themselves. I actually don't know, but that is the reality that is faced in those industries specifically. Yeah.
I want to touch on this topic of stereotypes and maybe kind of this implicit bias that many women face, whether it's as a working mother, as a student, as an entrepreneur. I'm keen to hear your perspectives, on that, because I know obviously there's a lot of women on the call who may also face certain stereotypes that we as men may not be aware of. I'd love to hear either your own opinions on the subject or maybe personal experiences and any kind of key takeaways that we could learn from that. I might start with Faye, if that's okay.
No problem. It's the seniority levels, right?
No, I'm trying to go around in a circle.
Gotcha. So I think there's like a double-edged sword for me. Because on one hand, I think I mentioned it earlier, there are all these positive stereotypes for women now that we're trying to take back this idea of women empowerment that sometimes I think is kind of putting a little bit too much pressure on women, that for you to be equal, you have to be exceptional, if that makes sense, right? And so I think that was a big thing that I struggle with when it comes to, stereotypes, especially with what I do. I think it sometimes makes me uncomfortable, the level of which myself is kind of spotlighted over kind of the work that I do. And a lot of it is because I'm a young girl, right? And it's kind of not great because the work that I do, it's not because I'm a young woman, but it's because it's work, right? It's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of struggle for me when you define the work that I do by the fact that I'm a woman rather than by the work, right? And so it's kind of a source of discomfort for me. On the other hand, maybe Katoni can speak for this when it comes to going down to the communities that we. Being a woman is not such a pro. A lot of times we'll get kicked out, especially considering the topics that we're discussing. A lot of times we do start with more basic issues such as children's rights, and even that can be kind of controversial, the idea that children have inalienable rights. Children, not just human beings, and those kinds of things can get us kicked out of these areas. And the fact that I'm a girl, I'm a woman, doesn't help the case as well, right? Kind of, why are you here? What do you know? And so it is these harmful stereotypes of women not being leaders in these fields kind of mean that it's not easy for us to start or initiate dialogues, especially when it causes discomfort for them in that area. Especially if we're talking about sexual assault, right? About sexual exploitation, most of the time, the perpetrators are the men. And so when we say that, usually they take it as a personal affront, right? So I think, yeah, it is that double-sided sword of it depends where you are. I think it draws back to our earlier conversation about economic disparities in circles where, perhaps the idea of feminism is more easily taken. I think there can be, right, in different circles, an inflation of this idea of women are great, women are cool, and it makes this kind of pressure for us to be exceptional in order for us to be equal, right? And on the other hand, we go down to these areas, I don't want to say, but essentially turun tangan, right? If we go, do our jangkauan, our outreach to these areas, most of the time, being a girl will mean that we'll have to take a longer time, a more comprehensive approach to make sure that we're seen as equals before we start digging into kind of the root issue. And that's kind of a big reason why Rumah Faye programs are never the same in every area. We always work together with a grassroots organization because we realize that our role is not to voice our opinions, but empower people there, because at the end of the day, long-term impact won't come from strangers. It won't come from foreigners. It'll come from the people who've lived there, understand the experiences that they go through. And all we're doing is equipping them with the skills that they need to do that. So yeah, that's what I speak for.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic answer. Aurora, would you also like to give, I guess, your perspective of, the role of stereotypes, whether especially in, I guess, a very male-dominated industry that you're in as well. Would love to hear kind of your perspective on that, and any advice as well for men.
So I think, yeah, there's this stereotype is yeah, as Faye said, it's sometimes it gives a women in a better position, but also worse at the same time. For instance, when I talk with my clients, and and most of them are sitting as a board of director, right? And then they ask my opinion about okay, if we have a discussion, and I said, okay, why are you hiring women? And the expectation, the answer of why they're hiring women and men is completely different. They're hiring women because women are persistent, women are loyal, right? Women are not expecting too much. And when they said, why are you hiring this person, which is man, right? And then they have a different answer. And I think that's quite interesting, because I think if you want to achieve non-biased management, we need to start to implement consistent method for rankings, and qualifying talents. It's all across you. If you value persistence, commitment, loyalty, and this, you have to implement it despite the gender, right? Because if the thing is, when one woman can have the strength of man, when I say can have a strength of man, of the society thinks it's a strength of man, they are not recognized, because if suddenly women are very vocal and expecting so much, right, and not but they and for instance, nowadays women decided to get married later, right? So when they say, oh, men are have more endurance, can work 20 hours a day, right, as a lawyer, but that's not necessarily true. Many women can work 20 hours a day, although I'm not supporting that anymore. But I used to work 20 hours a day, because before, maybe when women on late 20s, they say, yeah, they're gonna get married, right? But that's not true, right? So I think what do you expect from men and women? It needs to be same in terms of professionalism, right? When you review something as a management, right? Because once men or women sudden they are not in the box of your qualification, then they are in a very, you put them in a very disadvantaged position. Yeah.
And lastly as well, I'd like to hear from Tony, not only about I guess the stereotypes of women, but as a male who works closely on this issue day in, day out, what are some of the challenges that you've seen that when it comes to men actually participating openly in this conversation? I think more often than not, we see International Women's Day and all the men kind of take a step back and say, okay, this has got nothing to do with me, and think that there's nothing we can do on the topic. Is there any I guess advice or kind of key learnings that you have as well for men?
Yeah, sure, Nathan. Well, first of all, when you talk about stereotype, I wouldn't touch upon stereotypes against women, because Faye and Aurora and Abbie has mentioned about it. But we also should look at the fact that gender stereotype also disadvantaging men. It's also bring negative impacts to men as well. When men are always associated with there's this traditional ideas of masculinity. A man is masculine or good man only if they can be a breadwinners to their family. A man is only qualified as a good man if they are strong or muscular, if you like. So there are certain qualities of men that the society has constructed. So the consequences is when there are men who cannot, how do we say, who cannot associate with these certain criteria of being a good man, it's challenging. It's also create another burdens for them. In the pandemic context, for example, there is this great demands of or economic pressures for people to provide for their families, and this heavily put on men as the so-called head of the families. So you can imagine how stressful it is if that kind of stereotypes or that social constructions is always attached to men. So what I'm meaning to say with that logic is that when we talk about gender equality, it is not only the responsibilities of women, it is also responsibilities of men, because they are also have to bear the consequences of the gender inequality. Well, for example, when you talk about gender-based violence, the stereotype is always that men are perpetrators. But we also see, for example, Nathan say about the International Women's Day, there are men activists who also talk very vocal about how prevention, how gender-based violence or violence against women is something that we cannot tolerate it. So there are these how do we say, facts that shows that it is not only a cause that needs attention from girls and women, but it is also should be how do we say it, something that call boys and men to also do something to contribute to how do we say it, to eliminate these harmful or discriminatory practices towards girls and women. Well, my personal journey as well, when I involved in this cause, of course, there are a lot of challenges. Often people will laugh when I, for example, attend a forum and I announce that I am from UN Women. People will have, like, some of them will roll their eyes and say, "You are a woman, but you are a man. Why are you here? Or are you not a man?" So that kind of questions, I think, I mean, I face a lot. So gender identity is being questioned because you work in this issue, of course. That kind of things happen. But I think as long as we know that what we are talking about is an issue of justice, it is an issue of human rights, it is an issue of fairness. And these issues is not only responsibilities of one party, it is our duties as humans. So I would like to see gender equality as an issue of justice, and justice is of course everyone's responsibility to achieve in every level, starting from the government up to the very grassroots level, or even someone at personal level. I think there are three values that they have to, as a human, have to really how you see promote the principles of fairness, justice, and of course humanity. So as long as we frame the so-called gender equality in that principle, I think we won't see gender equality as something alienated. It's not a movement that is only a call for women's or girls' attention to it. No, it is for me, it is a humanitarian kind of calls or actions. And as a matter of fact, we are also seeing growing numbers or maybe trends of the so-called men feminists, meaning that men who actually self-proclaim as a feminist because they believe in the ideas of equality between men and women, because they believe on the women's experience for many decades or centuries who has been disadvantages of this so-called patriarchal system. And I think that's something that we want to see even grow stronger. In Indonesia, for example, even I know in Australia we have this movement called the White Ribbon Movement, where on the International Women's Day, men will do campaign on putting on the white ribbon in their attire to show their support to the cause of elimination of gender-based violence. But in Indonesia, it's we also saw that this kind of movement is growing. We have a movement called Aliansi Laki-Laki Baru, or the New Men's Alliance, which is actually comprising of the men's activists who have concern on gender equality and are willing to contribute to the cause of gender equality. So it also brings another optimism for us, actually.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for the answer. I want to touch on one element. I know we've only got half an hour left, and we've got quite a lot of questions from the audience. So I'm going to try and link them as much to the last answer. And one of the things you touched on was this idea of justice and, you know, opportunities and solutions. So I'd like to, I guess, finish today's panel on more of an optimistic note about really actions that we can start to take. So I'll start. This is a question for Aurora. The question from the audience was, what action have policymakers taken to boost gender diversity in the workplace that you've seen?
Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned before, right, that it's related to Iriantoni's statement that this gender equality needs to be the agenda of men and women of the society, right? We can only achieve a better society when 50% of the population in the same position of the other 50%. And I think this can we can as a policy maker, we can emphasize that, for instance, it's, you know, it's a little bit controversial when they say it's a mandatory quota for women to sit in parliament, and they said that if it's not if it's not capable, then they should not be there just for the sake of fulfill this quota. I strongly disagree with that. I refuse to believe that 50% of population, the women not having a capacity to sit in this to fulfill this quota, right? So why the quota is mandatory? Because when it starts from the parliament, and then we can always have a regulation that are not only seen by man lens, right? And then it's only from the women perspective, and then back again to the roots of the problem, right? The regulation and how regulation can be genderless, because it will never be genderless if the majority of the one making policy is the men, right? So that's my thinking about how we can create a better society from the regulation perspective. Also, if you talk about sectoral manpower, I mentioned before, right? Like this, we need to start. Maybe it's a long shot to have an equal paternity leave between men and women, but we need to start discover or observing that what is the potential for men to be involved more in parenthood, right? And 2 days is definitely not 2 days is definitely not enough, and these 2 days actually optional, so you can take it or you can't take it. And that's the for me. Yeah,
Interesting. It's because I remember there was a documentary by The Economist, and somebody said that I think Indonesia is ranked 85th in the world when it comes to gender equality, and they looked at those countries which are ranked at the top, and I think one of the ones that stood out was Iceland. And they said kind of one of the key policies that Iceland introduced was 3 months parental leave for men, to help actually give men the opportunity to allow women to still participate in the workforce, which is extremely interesting. So I guess what I'm hearing maybe is that as employers, we maybe have an opportunity to introduce some of those, at least at a private sector level, that allows more generous leave entitlements for men, so women actually have the ability to return to work sooner. Is that right? As one option. I'm just very interesting. Would you like to add to that, Tony or Faye or Abbie?
Maybe I can.
I'm going to have to. Yeah, sure.
Maybe I can kind of speak to like the youth perspective, although it's like a weird word.
Yeah.
And this might be a little bit of a different perspective from my peers as well, just because it's something that has gotten me a lot of flack over the past couple years. So when I was, I think, around 14 or 15, well, actually, when I was around 14 or 15, I came to this weird realization that I never really wanted to have kids. That's a pretty young age to make that decision, and I'm well aware of that. but it sat on my mind for a really long time, and I've never changed it. And I understand, the world is long, but I'm quite close to my parents, and when I was around like 16 or 17, I felt like I had to tell them that I might not ever have kids because I just really didn't want to. Obviously, I know some incredible mothers out there. It was just nothing personal. It's just I personally never wanted to have children, and luckily I come from a family that both parents were pretty, relatively okay with, considering, the country that we're from, the stereotypes. But I think once I had that conversation with my parents, 16, 17-year-old me understood it as, okay, everybody's going to be. And it opened a lot of different conversations with people around me once I started saying, I don't want to have kids when I grow up. I really don't want to do it. And a lot of people were really taken aback by it. A lot of people were even disappointed by it, because it was the idea that you, as a young woman, kind of have this responsibility to populate the world. I know that wasn't what they meant to say, but that's how it came off as, right? That if I wasn't having children, my life wouldn't be complete. So I can't say that that position is final, as far as I've lived so far, that's how I feel. But it is, I thought I wanted to add to this conversation on like maternity and maternity leave, and the idea that, different paths for different people, and this expectation that only like women need maternity leave kind of enforces the stereotype that all women want to be mothers, all women need this maternity leave, when men who want to be fathers don't necessarily get that same treatment, right? They don't get the paternity leave that you were mentioning earlier. So I thought just kind of maybe a perspective, my 2 cents as well.
Great. No, thank you very much for that.
To that.
Yeah, Tony, please.
Oh, sure, yeah. So yeah, just basically on these issues of maternity and paternity leaves, I think we should also see it from the business perspective as well. By providing like sufficient maternity leaves, imagine how many costs that you can save, rather than, because the tendency of then the women will be retained if they have sufficient maternity leaves. So you can save the cost of recruitment of new staff, for example. So from the business perspective, that should be also considered. And the other aspect is for the paternity leave. I totally agree with Aurora. This is something that is crucially probably needed in Indonesia context. For example, I know that in some countries it has been applied, mostly in the Nordic countries. The other, I think, there's also provide fathers a benefit to also how do we say, contribute to the parenting task. But not only that, we also see that, I think I read somewhere, couldn't remember the sources of it, but when someone is given the role of parenting or parenthood or taking care of child, it increased their empathy. And for me, empathy is really crucial. When someone has this empathy, they will usually tend to avoid the injustice treatment to others, or they are willing to do something to also change the system with injustice. So I think from that principle as well, the sharing burdens of parenting between mothers and fathers really important, and that's why I think business world and also decision makers has to also look into that issues as well. Yeah. And the other thing is actually not only that, what business can also do it, for example, is we also see some best practices apart from the regulations on the maternity or paternity leaves, but company continues to accommodate the parenting roles of mothers or working mothers, for example, by providing a room for lactation in their companies as facilities. Even some companies also provided childcare facilities, for example, so to enable women who are still do the parenting roles to also resume their work at the same time. So there are policies, there are infrastructures, and there are other principles, benefit that should be taken into account in this year.
Excellent. And I think there's some really important takeaways, because often I think employers just look at it and say, oh, not enough women are applying to our company. Something's wrong with the schools, not thinking that actually there might be something wrong with our organization that is maybe not making it attractive for women to apply. And so I'd be keen to hear from the panel, when you think of employers of choice for women, what companies come to mind, whether they're from the not-for-profit sector or from the private sector. What have they done differently that have made, I guess, better working environments for women? Anyone welcome to answer. I'll start with Abbie because she took a slight
Yeah, sorry. Technical issues. Yeah, my audio was working. Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I thought it's happening again. Okay. So I think well, since the past, I don't know how many, more than 5 years of my experience are in actually more tech companies. So I think at least from what I see, the bigger tech companies now are very aware of how to I mean at first it started as an employer branding to be more attractive to both male and female candidates. But I think I think that's a good start. Better start there than like nothing at all. So I think tech companies are doing quite well actually in tackling like those issues, making sure like women are supported and more inclusive, and of course because just the number of female in the tech industry itself is pretty low, then maybe that's why to boost the gender diversity within the organization itself.
Okay, thank you, Abbie. Tony, I mean, have you worked with any organizations that particularly stand out, I guess, more than others in Indonesia, or doing maybe something different that you've seen?
I cannot name one particular organization, because we have been working with so many organizations from so many sectors, government, civil society, even the private sectors. But what we can probably what I observe is actually there are, like I said, there are stronger interests and initiatives being done to that. One, I think, very significant changes happen lately, but maybe that is being interrupted by the pandemic, is actually in the public transportation. Say, for example, if you're asking one organization or institution to do something, how the public transportation in Jakarta start to thinking about the way how to make the public transportation system is safer for women. Because in the last couple of years and months, we have been hearing social media report, for example, on how women are being harassed when they are accessing public transportations, and the public transportation system is not really accommodating towards them. I mean, imagine if this, because many workers, many women employers are dependent on the public transportation. If public transportation is not made safe for them, imagine how challenging it is. And we also, one of our studies show that the decision for women to take a certain position in career or in education is also depending on the safety or their access from home to work, for example, from the public transportation. So in that, we work with the transportation companies in Jakarta, and they are willing to do a lot of initiative, including to revise their standard operating procedures to be more safe for women. Just another, for example, just some best practices that I can also highlight is from Gojek, for example. They recently also adapted some of our recommendation in our study on how to make a public transportation safer for women, and how they can also do something to prevent violence against women, and how within the Gojek service as well, they can have, how do we say, a good reporting mechanism where complaints on sexual harassment will be immediately tackled or prevented. So that kind of initiative, I think, is something that we really need to have more in many more companies. And not to mention as well, for example, in government, how the commitment is also made by companies regulation or state-owned enterprises regulation, for example, to make sure that women has a sort of certain quota in the leadership positions. Is also a good progress that we see. And one more thing I think to end is just last night, I was actually participating in this selection of youth volunteers for UN Women. We received more than 200 applications from all around Indonesia, and we have to shortlist like 20 applicants. And they are all very enthusiastic and spiritful comrades of Faye, I have to mention. They are really, really committed to this issue. So it is very hard and very difficult to us to just recruit 2 of them. We want to hire all of them. So what I'm meaning to say is actually, I see that this movement is getting stronger, and this kind of initiatives and very insightful and decision that ICEHOUSE made, for example, to provide this kind of forum, I think it's really should be appreciated.
Well, we're not there yet. I think having a discussion and panel is one thing, but taking action is even more important. So on that topic, this was a question for the female members of the panel. I'm assuming it was asked by a guy, which was any suggestions from the panelists on what male employees, and maybe let's make it broader, what male employees or even male employers can do to make female employees feel more included and less discriminated at work. Any? Tricky one. Sure, go Faye. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just.
I wasn't sure like what the etiquette here is.
Yeah. Sure.
I think I might speak more too. So, separate from Rumah Faye, I have kind of done like temp jobs, kind of like, I mean, I kind of volunteer at places and things like that. And this is purely anecdotal, as well as from my friends' experiences as well in the workplace. I think a big thing is for male employers specifically is making a clear, how do I say this? Making a clear access from female employees to male employers regarding workplace harassment. I think a big thing that a lot of, especially entry-level women struggle with in the workplace is sexual harassment. And sexual harassment comes in a lot of different forms, right? It's not just groping, which may be one of the most direct ways, but a lot of times it's a comment that might make a girl uncomfortable, but it's very, it's sexual in nature. It kind of, because I think a big thing, a problem is here that Tony mentioned earlier is the power dynamic, right? Even if it seems harmless to the guy, a lot of females will previously have had not fun experiences, right? Whether it's in the street, whether it's on their own home, and having that kind of threatening aura, I would almost say, in the workplace isn't ideal. And a lot of times when the employer is a male, females don't feel comfortable coming forward to say that it's an issue. They don't know how to report it because male employers don't even realize it's a problem. So I think opening essentially like a road in order to report those kinds of things, making it clear that it is not allowed in the company is really important. I think a lot of males kind of, if they want to support women, they assume it's a given that like, oh, of course I support it. It's like, of course, if there's an issue, you should come to me. But for a lot of women, we don't come from a background where it's safe for us to report it. And so if it's not made clear, it's not necessarily something a lot of women will do. I think that's what I might say about what male employers could do.
Great advice. Thank you. Abbie, did you want to add to that?
I think probably.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, like, we need more women in leadership, basically. We need more women, like, all organization does. And in my opinion, I think what would help, as an employer, what employers can do is basically to provide, like, empower the women in the company by providing like a mentorship, more like a mentorship, because in practice or traditionally, like, when you have a male, a male head of the company, most likely the next person in line is going to be male, because, it's more natural for male to have a male mentor, male mentor. And then, that's going to be the next person in line, or the next leaders. So I think it would be good, to be able to, more balance it out, not only like, focus on, next leadership, not only like male, but also female. I think that's, the probably one of the disadvantage that, maybe middle managers face in order for them to step to the next step of leadership, I think. Yeah. Yes. But I mean, you're a great mentor, by the way.
No pressure. Yeah.
Yes.
Aurora, would you like to add to that as well?
I mean,
Any
I don't really have many experience across sectors or function, right? I spent most of my career in consulting, and so my peers are more or less know how to treat women colleagues, right? But the problem is, in a consulting, it's a man dominated sectors, and sometimes the way and then also the leadership, it's men, because it's just a difficult environment for women to be in, that we have discussed earlier. But sometimes, when the sector is dominated by men, and then how you assess people perform or not by being, I'm not saying it's necessarily right, but it's not necessarily the fact. But for instance, pushing around, and that things that are like, what traditionally seen as a masculine, and it's being very ambitious. It's and this is something that are I'm being stereotyping, but in Indonesia, it's not that every woman who are ambitious not necessarily aggressive or speak up, right? But it's in this sector particular, like if you talk louder, if you push people around, and then have a strong opinion, that's seen as someone who is ambitious, and then they are entitled for excel in their career or in the position. And I think that's something that the employers need to change, right? I see it, I'm back again to the genderless standard or ratings on. So we need to see that based on performance and everything involved, but it's applying to all and trying to set standard of a genderless characteristic on what men and women can achieve. And I think for me, it's that although I have a question, actually more than so I have a friends, most of my girlfriends are engineers, interestingly, and they work in the private sector. And when they work with private sector providing UN in Africa, in the South America, they always ask why I'm the only one woman, and if I work with NGOs, there's so many women in that. And I'm actually curious, and I would like, I don't know if this is a bit off the topic to ask Patwani, like, why is it very dominated? It's maybe something that private sector can take, can learn from it, right?
Tony?
Yeah. Well, we are as curious as you, Mbak Aurora, in that regard.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm also curious to hear from our audience members. So let me just open the floor. If we have any live questions, anyone in the audience who would like to raise their hand, and I can take any questions. I'm going to allow for a few seconds of awkward silence till hopefully we get a question. Any raised hands? Don't see any yet. I learned this the hard way in our very first town hall. I asked everyone to raise their hands, and I got 10 minutes of the most brutal, awkward silence. that I could put up with, which is why we started Slido. No questions at all from the audience? Okay, I'll refer then. We don't have any raised hands. Ah, Masamal. Okay, let me just unmute. Can we unmute Amal, Ramanta?
Yeah, wait.
Okay, the floor is yours.
I guess I'm already on mute, yeah.
Yeah, we
hello,
can hear you.
I'm Amal. I'm just curious. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I just wonder how far the preference about working preference between male and female play part on the balance ratio on the workplace. I mean, if we see on the if we tarik ke belakang apa istilahnya, if we look back on the college, we will have imbalance ratio between the preference male and female. For example, when I study in my college, I study psychology, and the male is the lowest number. I only have 30 male on my generation from 160, and so the generation above me and so the generation below me. And maybe we could see on the other faculty as like economy or law, there will be a more balanced ratio between male and female. I just want to know how far that preference play part on the workplace situation. As we can see on the ICEHOUSE itself, I reflect, if we see on the project management level and management level, we will see a balance ratio between male and female. But if we see to the engineer position, we will have a relatively unbalanced ratio between male and female. And I don't believe ICEHOUSE having that stereotype about male and female, right? Because anyway, we have head of engineer is a woman. And then at what point we could say a workplace is already apply a balance ratio between male and female? I think if we already I believe we have to eliminate the stereotype about male and female in workplace, but yeah, I'm afraid the preference between male and female could take on this. Please enlighten me.
I would love to start by answering the question if it's okay. Because I from what I heard, as you said it, whilst you're right, I think we've done well in ISAS, at least at a management level. I don't even know if it was by design or by intention to have somewhat of an equal distribution of men and women. You're right. I don't think that's the end of the story, right? Before we can, pump our chest and say that we've done a good job to make ourselves an attractive employer for women. I've, in the last, hour and a half, I've been taking so many notes and ideas, that now that I've heard from the panel, when I thought of, we've just reviewed our company regulation. And I know that, our paternity leave for men is 2 days, right? We're absolutely guilty of that. 5 days. Okay. Now, 5 days is nowhere near the 3 months that, that women get. Now, by changing that policy, will that encourage, more men who are, and I know we've had new fathers in ICEHOUSE who may not have those same opportunities, and allow their wives to re-enter the workforce sooner. So that's something that, that I've learned. The feedback as well that, Faye said about allowing an option to actually escalate issues of, if there's gender harassment or sexual harassment in the workplace. Our whistleblower goes directly to our commissioner, who is male, right? Now that's probably not, the best option if, people feel intimidated of bringing those issues, to a board, which is male only. So I'm already thinking there's a lot can already change, even from this one discussion. So for me, this has been really, really eye-opening. So yes, I think there's much more we can do, and I have been taking notes. So thank you so much for everyone's panel on the panel for your help with that. But I'd like to hand it over to others as well to answer.
I think I can only speak for, in our case in ICEHOUSE. I think, we don't see like, gender as one of the criteria, for certain position we want male, for certain position we want female, everyone treated equally. I think it's just basically the supply side. Basically, we don't have, I think even in general, like despite the gender, in tech companies, there's a big gap between the demand and supply. And that's already one thing. And then, I think in general, I think we already mentioned a few times in STEM, there's less and less women are actually in this, industry or working within like, the engineering, field, basically. I mean, we would like to have more women. I think the past hire have been like a few great women, but then again, we still need to, as a company, you still need to grow, but we cannot limit our option. Oh, we're only hiring women as well. So yeah, I hope that answers, Amal.
Is there anyone on the panel who would like to add? Otherwise, I'll move to one more question. I'm just aware of the time, and I see another hand up. I'll take the question from Isna Nurani. If you can unmute yourself, and if you could turn your video on, we'd love to see who's asking the question. Are you there? There's Isna. We can't hear you. Can anyone hear? No, we still can't hear. Have you checked your audio that you're not on mute yourself? Hello, isn't it? Yeah, back on mute. Cannot hear you. Sorry, no, we can't hear you. Maybe check your sound settings. If it's easier, you're welcome to type your question. I think we have a comments box. Okay, let me, while Isna's typing her question, or I'm gonna fix her mute, were there any other questions from the audience? Any other hands up? Still can't hear you. Isna, I'm sorry. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can. Yes.
Sorry. So before we talk about child abuse and then human trafficking and education for women and men, also we hear a lot about bullying, but not many people talk about mental health, especially in this pandemic. A lot of people actually got depression because of economic problem, but not many people realize when they get depression. And the rate woman to get depression is higher than, I think it's higher than men, because she have to work and then have to taking care of her child and the household and everything. So my concern now is there any organization or maybe organization who can help people with mental health right now? Because it's really important. I think it's really important, because sometimes people will thinking their child is their object, so they did something wrong to their child because of their problem, especially in this pandemic. That's it.
Okay. Would anyone like to respond
to that, Nathan?
Oh, Tony, yeah, sure.
Sure. Thank you, Mbak Isna, for the questions. Actually, I really agree, and your point is really valid. So back in last year, in December, UN Women and Indosat Uridu, we did a survey on the gender impact of COVID-19 to women and men in Indonesia. And one of the findings from that study shows that although men who are affected directly by the pandemic, say for example, the level of mortality or death cases among men is higher, but women also have a higher level of mental health disruption or depression in the pandemic. 56% of our respondents says that women respondents says that they have some mental issues problem during the pandemic compared to 40% in the men, which is lower. So definitely yes, and we can see that the causes of that is doubling or even sometimes tripling burdens of during the pandemic, and it adds depressions for them. Then they are more prone to depression and stress and anxiety, of course. And yes, we just to respond quickly to your question, is there an organization working on that? There are some organizations that provide counseling for women. One of the organizations that we have also working in the past with is a foundation called Pulih, Yayasan Pulih. I don't know if you ever heard about it. They provide counseling services that's including like an online, if I'm not mistaken, they also provide online counseling for women. And there are some other organizations who specifically provide counseling for women survivors of domestic violence. There are also some names that I can mention. But for general counseling, we usually work with this particular foundation called Yayasan Pulih. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Faye, did you also want to add to that? I saw a hand go up.
No, I was just adding, I was just agreeing with Katoni. Yayasan Pulih is an organization that Rumah works with quite closely, just because a lot of the victims we work with definitely need some sort of counseling or psychiatric help depending on the case. And so that does mean that we work quite closely with different mental health organizations. Yayasan Pulih is a really strong one here. And on a less counseling note and more of like a focusing on raising awareness on mental health as an issue, ubah stigma is a quite big one that I think has quite a good reach among young people as well, especially young women. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you so much. Now we have two final questions before we close. This question is open to all of the panelists. And now I know that Tony gave a fairly daunting statistic before about the time it's going to take for equality was previously 100 years, now it might be 130. Is there anything that you are optimistic about when you look at what's happening in Indonesia that makes you optimistic that we have a chance of closing that gap? So it's not 130 years, but at least in our lifetime. What positive changes are you seeing or things that make you optimistic about us closing that gap? Open to anyone. Maybe I'll start with Tony, since it was your statistic that really shook us.
I was actually expecting our colleagues here to actually respond to that, because I had mentioned some from my end. So I think I would like to hear as well from friends here on that, Nathan, if you like, if you're okay with that.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I can go.
Sure.
So a question that I used to really hate people ask me in panels or whatever is when they ask tips and triknya tuh apa sih Kak? What is the tips and trick for you to kind of be able to do these community outreach about the issues that are taboo? Because a lot of people struggle with the first steps, right? Like once you get in there, yes, you're going to face a lot of struggles, but it's the introduction that a lot of people struggle with, especially when we're talking about reproductive health, about children's rights, about sexual harassment and sexual assault. And I hated that question, because the truth is there's no tips and trick, right? Rumah, our prevention programs run for, well, we've been working for 8 years, so they've been working for 8 years, in some areas for shorter. And that's because, kind of drawing back to what I said earlier, that change isn't from a foreigner, and a foreigner doesn't mean, you know, someone who's not an Indonesian. A foreigner means somebody who's not from that area, right? I could be Indonesian. I'm also a girl. I'm also, say, Bataknese, and the community we're serving is Bataknese. That doesn't mean anything because I don't understand the same lived experiences. And so when it comes to what are we looking for and what are we seeing, the first part is what are we looking for is long-term change. That means changes in the way people think about the issue, because a lot of times gender discriminatory thoughts very in everything we do. The idea that even culturally, if I were in a family meal, my mother and I would be the one who are expected to pick up after ourselves, not my little brother and my dad. And so those are the little things that we kind of have to start checking, both in our own community and the communities that we serve. And so what we're looking for really, in at least in Rumah Faye's programs, is that these areas where there are high levels of child trafficking, exploitation, and abuse, they'll become victim oriented, in the sense that if people there, we train them to be paralegal. In that sense, they know how to identify a case, they know how to report a case, and once the victim comes back, this is a safe community for them, right? It's a victim-oriented community. We can't say it's perfect, right? We don't know how it's going to work, but by, you know, doing this long-term change, by essentially not just serving them, but working together with them, that provides the long-term change that we're looking for. And I can't obviously speak for statistics when it comes to Rumah Faye, but I will say that anecdotally, it's incredible that we've seen the younger kids be much more open to discussing the issues that previously were harder to do. You know, before that, when we were talking reproductive, the kids would laugh, they would giggle, they'd be uncomfortable. A lot of the questions were harmful in the sense that the male students would ask, why is it wrong to touch this girl's chest area because she's my girlfriend, it's okay, even if she just says no. Those were valid, those were actual questions they had, right? And so we're seeing them teach their siblings, who become our focal point, who are more open to the ideas that we're telling them. And that's what we're looking for. And so I can't speak for statistics when it comes to Rumah Faye. We don't really have, we haven't really done, you know, a thorough survey, although we wish we had. But anecdotally, it's been incredible to see the communities where we've worked for over 5 years. We're seeing that change in mentality that's reflected not only in the students we used to teach, but but also the students that are incoming in the workshops and training that we do. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Faye. Aurora, did you have any last remarks that you would like to leave the audience with today on your optimism about the future, closing the gap?
I think I agree with Faye, and it says like I have a big hopes in the younger generation, right? Let's face it, this revolution in the humanity only happened this past 5 years, and this is because the younger generation speak louder than the previous generation. And I think people always talk negative about millennials, but I really have a big, actually I'm also millennials, right? And then the generation after that. And I think I have a big hope on that, because they are more they're open-minded, that we open-minded, we have a better access to information, right? We have a better access to express our feelings. That's why now women be probably our voices heard more than ever, right? Because we can talk on the internet without violation, right? Without violence. And this is something I'm amazed, right? Because this is I think the only revolution that's done without violence. Gender equality, right, in humanity. And I think it's thanks to the younger generation. That's my my spirit, and it's only getting better. Unfortunately, we have this pandemic that complicate the existing problem. But and then now I see more and more men and women become allies, right? As we said before, that this, if we want this to be done in our society, it can't be done only by women. It needs to be done by men, and we work together. It's not about men versus women. it's about supporting each other. And I think more and more people aware about it from the women and the men's perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the response, Aurora. I'll finish with Tony and Abbie. If you'd like to add as well, any closing remarks?
Okay,
Look
thank
up.
you, Batan. Okay, I think yeah, just even like talking about it right now, it's for sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Okay,
yep,
so
yep.
just even talking about it right now, I think it's already like at least we already have that awareness, and hopefully the everyone who's here, whether your capacity as a a coworker, as a spouse, as a son, or as an employer, what you need to do, like what's the right thing to do. I think if we're able to replicate this, like in other organization as well, in your surrounding, hopefully there's going to be a ripple effect of like people realizing the impact that you can have to the women you work with. I think, yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Thank you, Abbie. And Tony, finally.
I just couldn't figure out how to put it better than other than my friends.
Okay.
As already said here, but for me, I just would like to remind us that the homework are still there. We have a lot to do. We have a lot of change to make, particularly in the policy level. For example, even until now, we haven't seen the law on the elimination of sexual violence has been passed. It is still pending in the parliament, but there are some progress that it is now at least included into the priority agenda of the parliament. So we see there are baby steps towards that efforts. So I just would like to appreciate every support and every insight, and I learned a lot really from this from my colleagues here. And I feel that this how do we say, this work that we are doing will be much easier if we have more allies, like my Aurora has already said it, both from men, both from private sectors and also from the government and the civil society. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you so much, Tony. I really, really appreciate it. And just one final question, and this one I've been asked a few times from the audience. The last and final question is, since everyone has heard from your cause, Faye, and your not-for-profit, I think a lot of people are very interested to know how they can learn more, how they can help with such an important cause. So if you could maybe leave us with some remarks of how can we get in touch, how can we support or donate, that would be great.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that everybody has maybe a heart kind of to contribute to the cause. I think before I even talk about Rumah, a big thing for me is just for us to be aware about the issue in our own communities. I think when it comes to human trafficking, there's a difference between knowing about the issue and being aware of our role in preventing the issue. And so I know, hundreds of people can tell me the definition of human trafficking, but the same people, if I ask them, what would you do? What can you do if you know that a friend is a victim of this case? Do you know what to do? A lot of them don't know. And so what I can say is just to familiarize with how to identify these cases in the people closest to you, because most of the time those are victims. And second of all, to know how to report those cases, whether that's straight to the government or sometimes the victims are uncomfortable with that, and you can contact organizations like Rumah, depending on the location, to support the victim through that process, that they can make sure that the victim is safe, that their identity is safe, and their family is safe during the reporting process. Other than that, there are organizations like Yayasan Pulih that Tony mentioned earlier, which can help with counseling if it's outside of Batam, because it's where Rumah Safe House is. That said, if you want to support our work specifically, which I really, really would appreciate, you can go to www.rumahfaye.org.id, or you can just Google us, the website. I don't know why I gave the link. Nobody's going to remember that. Or you can go to our Instagram too, at Rumah Faye, and the donation instructions are on our website. And you can also engage in our programs as well if you would like to specifically sponsor a program, or for a girl to have access to counseling or her access to legal aid. It's definitely up to you, and we would really appreciate any type of contribution. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Faye. And thank you so much for all of our wonderful panelists. I know that we're slightly over, so thank you again so much for being so generous with your time, so insightful, and the great questions from our audience today. This was something new for ICEHOUSE, having a panel on something that's not tech for a change, but I can tell you now, it definitely won't be our last. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you all at the next Geek Talk.